Before I introduce Flint, I do want to introduce Nancy Kramer. She's the president of the 10th Mountain Division. 10th Mountain Division Foundation.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you for letting me be a part of the program this evening. It's so great to see. I knew we packed the Steamboat has been so good about supporting the 10th Mountain Division. And that is from a rich history of having over 20 veterans that were either born and raised here or came here to live after the war. And there are some 18 descendants that live in town. So you know the town is Ski Town, USA, but it could be 10th Mountain Division. So anyway, I'm honored to serve as the president of the 10th Mountain Division Foundation. It was started by a group of veterans, in particular to fund the Tennessee Pass Monument. How many of you have been up to the top of Tennessee Pass and seen the monument? It's a wonderful place, very special place. And we will be holding in-person Memorial Day services there this year, finally after a 2-year hiatus. And so we'll start that at 11 o'clock in the morning on Memorial Day. Once the monument was built, the veterans turned to providing scholarships for descendants. Since that time, we continue to do scholarships for descendants, but also for graduate work in military history. We're looking at outdoor experience, outdoor industry scholarships, but we have a plethora of partners that we work with and fund. We have a corpus that's just over $3 million. We're going to be working on increasing that over the next few years. But the funds that we spin off of that corpus, we do veteran scholarships, we do the veteran support veterans in adaptive ski programs, also some career transition. So some information in the back about that. Pick up one of the pamphlets, upside down, it's been a long day. Pick up one of the pamphlets. This lists all of our programs, and you might be interested in a particular area, always looking for people to serve. We also are taking information so that we can get you on our email list, keep you up to date. And if you sign up this evening and give us your information, we have a drawing. We have a 10th Mountain Division Foundation hat, water bottle, but the most important is we have a 10th Mountain whiskey kit. So sign up and we'll do a little drawing at the end of the evening, or we'll have maybe one of your staff do some, but I want to be transparent. We'll select names and I'll contact you and we'll get those gifts to you. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. I think you're going to enjoy Flint. He's been a long-time friend and he is awesome. So thank you so much.
Do his introduction because he knows it the best, but we are so excited to have him here with us today. He is a very well-known speaker and historian on this subject, and so we're just really honored that he braved the weather on the Front Range, not in Steamboat, to get here. And because of such a wonderful response that we're having tonight, I do want to promise that Flint and I are conspiring to have him come back and do a round 2 of this talk as a follow-up on one of his other books. So I promise you I'll have him back, and please help me welcome Flint Whitlock.
Thank you very much, Candace, and wow, what a great turnout tonight. You guys didn't go skiing today, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool. I'm from Denver, originally from the Chicago area. My dad was in the 10th Mountain Division. He was in one of the field artillery battalions there, and that's how I got interested in the 10th. I give you a little background. I went to the University of Illinois. I got a degree in graphic design and commercial art, but I was always as much a writer as I was an artist. And it wasn't until, well, then I spent about 30 years in advertising in Denver and Colorado Springs. Back in the mid-'80s, I wrote an article about the 10th Mountain Division. I started to do some research on the 10th. My dad had passed away at the age of 57, so I never really had a chance to discuss his wartime experiences with him. After college, when I graduated, I got an ROTC commission. I was a second lieutenant in the Army. I spent 5 years in the Army. I got 2.5 years in Germany, a tropical vacation in Vietnam, and my last year was at Fort Carson down in Colorado Springs, which is what brought me to Colorado. And everywhere you went, you heard 10th Mountain, 10th Mountain. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Like I said, I wrote an article. One of the 10th Mountain veterans contacted me and he said, I've got over 200 photographs of the division in training and in combat, and I'm looking for somebody to help me put together a book. And since you seem to know, a participle from a gerund, don't ask me what those mean. Would you be interested in working on the book project? I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun. And I thought, okay, it'd take about 6 months to flesh out the article and get it, book size. And 6 years later, I'm still working on it. I interviewed, I think, somewhere between 50 and 75 veterans of the 10th Mountain Division, most of whom are now all gone, unfortunately, but I captured their stories and put them in the book. And many of them said to me, I never told my kids or my wife what I did in the Army, but I want to tell you because I don't want what I went through to be lost to history. And so I really appreciate the confidence that these gentlemen showed in me and telling me their stories. And so Bob Bishop and I put together our book called Soldiers on Skis. We have actually 12 copies here, so hopefully the first 12 people who want one can get one, and those who don't make the cutoff there, we can take your order and mail it to you. So Soldiers on Skis came out in '92, and it got a lot of great response, and I thought, well, gee, maybe this author thing is something I ought to pursue. So I wrote another book. It was about another Colorado-related unit called the 45th Infantry Division. Everybody knows about the 10th Mountain. Nobody knows about the 45th. 10th Mountain was in combat for about 4 months. 45th Division was in combat for 511 days. They made 4 amphibious assault landings in the Mediterranean, and they liberated the Dachau concentration camp at the end of the war. Wow. So that became my second book. And maybe Candace will have me come back and talk about that one the next time. So I got bit by the author bug, and I continued writing. I've got 14 books out now, 2 more coming out later this year. I'm working on a documentary about the Battle of Italy in World War II and the part that the 10th Mountain played. I do lectures on board Viking cruise ships on World War II history in the places that they go. I'm supposed to be doing a D-Day trip in June. We'll have to see what the situation in Europe is like at that time. And then I'm also on the board of directors of the Broomfield Veterans Museum, and in my spare time I am the editor of World War II Quarterly magazine. So you can tell I've kind of devoted my life to military history now, especially as it pertains to the Second World War. And last September, I'm honking my own horn here, I was inducted into the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame. I don't deserve that. And I told the organizers, you must have gotten the wrong Flint Whitlock. But they said, no, you're the right one. And I said, okay, well, unless they come and storm my door and take it away from me, I'm keeping it. But tonight I want to tell you the story of the 10th Mountain Division in World War II. I entitled it, Skiing Off to War with the 10th Mountain Division. It's really a love story. It's a love that these men had for each other and for the mountains. And it was something that whenever you meet a 10th Mountain person, you will feel that love. It'll just exude out of them. We have at least one 10th Mountain Division veteran here with us tonight, and I'll introduce him at the end of the talk. Do we have any other 10th Mountain veterans? Okay, so we'll save him as a special surprise guest. I want to go back because it's, I think, important for you to understand the historical context of how mountain warfare came to be. I think we can go all the way back probably to the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, when the Greeks beat the Persians in a mountain pass in Greece. Hannibal crossed the Alps a couple hundred years later. I love this slide. I don't know if you in the back can see it, but there's an elephant falling off of a cliff right there in the middle of the slide. Obviously, the elephants were not well trained for mountain and winter warfare. Jump ahead a few centuries, Valley Forge, Washington and the Continental Army, Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, and General Winter that played a great part in defeating him in 1812. In the 1800s, the Swedes put some of their troops on skis so they could get through the snow in Sweden to fight their battles. In World War I, there was heavy fighting in the Italian Alps as well. Between World War I and World War II, a number of countries experimented with troops that were trained for winter warfare. Finland had, of course, a well-trained contingent. Italy had the Alpini, France had their Chasseurs d'Alpine, and Norway had troops on skis as well. The Russo-Finnish War of December 1939 until March of 1940 really brought it home, the importance of having well-trained troops who knew how to fight and move in Arctic conditions. The Red Army, the Soviets had tried invading Finland, really got punched in the snout with that one. 168,000 casualties, either dead or missing. In 39, September 39, Adolf Hitler decides it's time to invade Poland. And there are a lot of similarities with what's going on in Ukraine to what happened at the beginning of World War II as well. So Hitler invades Poland. Britain, France declare war on Germany. Germany then decides to invade Norway and Denmark on April 9th of 1940. And a month later, Germany invades France, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. The British send the British Expeditionary Force to France and Belgium to try and hold back the German hordes. But in May and June of 1940, Germany really pushes the British and some of the French troops out of France at Dunkirk. In October of 1940, Italy decides it's going to beat up on its longtime rival Greece, and so they send an army through the Balkans. They don't do very well. They have disastrous casualties. More than 10,000 Italians died of exposure, in addition to 25,000 battle deaths. Well, Mussolini says to his buddy Hitler, says, hey, you got to help me out here. We've run into a little sticky situation in Greece. And so Hitler, who is planning at this point to invade the Soviet Union, says, all right, I'll put my invasion on hold for a few weeks and I'll help you out. So Germany comes to the rescue of the Italians in Greece, and in April 1941, Greece is finally conquered by the Germans. At the start of the war, 1940, the Germans have 3 mountain division men who are superbly trained for mountain and winter warfare. By the end of the war, they would have 14 mountain divisions. How many did the U.S. have at that time? Right, the big goose egg. At that point, skiing was primarily a sport for the rich and famous. Sun Valley was probably the premier resort many of the movie stars, Veronica Lake, Ingrid Bergman, Ernest Hemingway, Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, Jinx Falkenberg, Ginger Rogers, Jane Russell, Claudette Colbert, Sonia Henney were all in part of this milieu of celebrities who wanted to hit the slopes. Now, some of you aren't old enough to know who these people are, but I spotted a couple people here, I think, who can name most of those folks. Now, one man saw this deficiency that the U.S. Army had. His name was Charles Minot Dole. His nickname was Minnie Dole. He was a New York insurance executive, and he was also the president of the National Ski Patrol System. How many ski patrollers, present or past, are here? Okay, so you probably heard the name Minnie Dole a few times in the course of your career. Minnie was very concerned about what was going on in Europe. He saw what happened in the Russo-Finnish War. He saw what happened in Italy. And he really felt that, you know, the United States, if we got involved in the war, that we would need to have troops that were specially trained to fight and survive in an alpine setting. And so he started writing letters to President Roosevelt and to Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall, explaining the need and why we had this deficiency and when is the Army going to wake up and do something about it. Well, Marshall said, well, if we ever get involved in a war, we're going to have regular troops. We're going to have regular infantry. We're going to have armor. We're going to have paratroopers. We don't need no stinking mountain troops. It was a concept that was beyond him. But finally, I think Marshall was so sick and tired of getting these weekly letters from Minnie Dole and from Roger Langley, the head of the National Ski Association, that he said, okay, fine, you do it. And this was the first time that the U.S. military has ever authorized a civilian agency to be the official recruiter for a military unit. And Dole was just overjoyed about this. He said, yeah, I do know everybody in skiing. And he started sending out letters to all the ski areas, to all the ski patrollers, and saying the Army's going to form a unit of ski troops, mountain troops, and please volunteer for that. And so all across the country, wherever there was a ski area, a ski school, a college, or a high school ski team, they were encouraged to have their members join. The American Alpine Club got involved as well, and so they were recruiting people with skills in the mountains and mountain climbing. And so this thing started to take off. There were 15,000 original applicants, and out of those, the best 8,000 were chosen. You had to have 3 letters of recommendation to even be considered. Letters from your high school coach or your minister, your pastor, somebody in town who had a reason to believe that you had reasonably good character. And so all these young men started pouring into the division. It wasn't a division yet, but men like Dick Durrance, Pete Seibert, Steve Knowlton, John Litchfield, these were all college hotshot skiers, mostly from the New England states. There was a climber named Paul Petzold. He was a member of the first U.S. climbing team to attempt the summit of K2, the world's second highest peak. And there were also hundreds of Europeans who joined. Walter Prager was the ski coach at Dartmouth College. There were Austrians, Tony Mott, Luigi Folger, and Friedel Pfeiffer, who had come to the States in the late 1930s to either get jobs in the ski industry or to escape the onslaught of Hitler's troops. Peter Gabriel was a Swiss mountaineer and head of the ski school at Franconia, New Hampshire. You've all, I'm sure, seen The Sound of Music. Well, the 2 Von Trapp brothers, Werner and Rupert, joined the 10th Mountain. They had probably at least one falconer, a guy with a bow and arrow, and maybe a bear tamer or 2 as well. They were looking for all sorts of skills here. They also had my dad, Jim Whitlock. He had never been on skis in his life. The only mountains he'd ever seen were the slag heaps in Gary, Indiana. But he got drafted. Once they got their quota of skilled skiers and mountaineers, they started bringing in draftees, most of whom had never skied before. Probably the most famous person who was a part of the 10th in those days was a Norwegian named Torger Tokla. Torger was as I said, is a Norwegian, and he was the world champion record holder in the ski jump. We've got a nice ski jump hill right outside here. I'm sure if he had been around at that time, he would have loved to have taken off from your hill. A story is told about Torger. One day he was in the supply room, and there was the counter there, which is about 4 feet high and about 3 feet across. And to demonstrate how strong his legs were, without taking a step, he jumped up and over the counter. That's the kind of athletes that made the 10th Mountain Division. They also needed people with other skills: lumberjacks, blacksmiths, forest rangers, and cowboys and rodeo riders. Well, blacksmiths and cowboys and rodeo riders, what is that all about? Jim Like was a rodeo champion from southern Colorado. He joined the division. The reason that they needed these people with these skills was because they were going to have about 4,000 mules and horses in the division. They were about as far away from being motorized as most any division in the Army at that time. The mules would be used as pack animals to carry supplies into the trackless mountain areas. You can see here a recoilless rifle on the back of this mule. I don't think they actually fired it from the back of this mule. That would have singed his ears, I'm sure. Of course, December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks the base at Pearl Harbor, and the United States finds itself in the war. Shortly thereafter, the first unit that would be the first unit of the 10th Mountain Division, the 1st Battalion of the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment was formed, and they were sent to Fort Lewis, or Camp Lewis at that time, and trained on Mount Rainier. This is kind of an experiment to see if this was a viable concept. So while they were working on their skills at Mount Rainier, the Army is looking for a place for a permanent home. They look at Camp Lewis, of course, Camp Snelling, Minnesota, the Great Sand Dunes National Monument in Colorado. I don't know how that made the list. Camp Ord, California, Camp Ethan Allen, Vermont, West Yellowstone, Montana. But the one they settled on was a little place nobody had ever heard of called Pando, Colorado. Now this is what what we call Eagle Park, or the Eagle Valley, or the Pando Valley looked like back before they started building the camp. It was an area that was 9,200 feet above sea level, located about 100 miles west of Denver. How many have ever gone to Camp Hale and tramped around there? Okay, almost everybody. That's wonderful. Here's a closer view. It was located between Minturn at the north and Leadville to the south. It was named after Brigadier General Irving Hale. He graduated from Denver East High School in 1877. He went to West Point, graduated in 1884, and he had the highest grade point in the school's history. He also, during the Spanish-American War, led the 1st Colorado Regiment into the Philippines, and they captured the capital of Manila. And he was one of the founders of the Veterans of Foreign Wars after he came back. So, you know, if you're going to name a camp after somebody, you ought to name it after somebody who's got this kind of resume. Here's a picture of some soldiers waiting at the Pando Railroad Station. At that time, Pando was about a railroad station. The troops who were there were called the Pando Commandos, at least they called themselves that. And they had a little insignia here of a panda on skis, kind of a cute thing. But back to Pando. The Army hired an engineering company called Black & Veatch out of Kansas City, and a construction company named Platt Rogers. I believe they were in Pueblo, and they got together and they formed a unit called the Pando Constructors. One of the first things they had to do it was to get rid of all of the vegetation that was in the valley. So you see a bulldozer here ripping up all of the willows that were there. They straightened the Eagle River that ran through the valley, and they started to build. They had about 10,000 workers that they hired for the summer to do the work. In the background, behind the first line of trees, you can see some buildings, kind of low buildings with roofs. That's where the workers lived. So they had to build their own camp before they could build Camp Hale. The construction began in April of 1942, and they completed it by November of 1942. Wow. There were, like I said, 10,000 workers, over 800 buildings that they put up during that period of time, and it cost a measly $31 million in 1942 dollars. Here's a look at the camp. This is a look towards the north end. This is probably taken in about 1943. And here's a view to the south end. The camp was about a half-mile wide and about 5 miles long north to south. There were over 240 Women's Army Corps personnel who were stationed there. They did such things as man the switchboards, were cashiers at the PX, drove the officers around, and generally fit right in with what was going on at the camp. There was also a battalion of about 1,000 Norwegians called the 99th Infantry Battalion. They were specially recruited and sent to Camp Hale to train in anticipation that one day they would return to Norway and liberate their country. And it did actually happen that way, but much later in the war. So I should also mention, because some people, I throw out terms like a division or a battalion or a regiment. A division at that time was about 14,000 men. I mean, it's a huge corporation today. 14,000 men. The Army had 93 divisions in World War II. The war is heating up. In November of 42, Operation Torch takes place. This is the invasion of North Africa. First time American ground troops have mixed it up with German ground troops and Italians, for that matter. You can see some of the fighting going on in North Africa from November of 42 to May of 43. Meanwhile, back at Camp Hale, our boys are working on their winter survival skills. The 85th and the 86th Mountain Infantry Regiments have been formed. So we're getting close to the 14,000 figure. In July of 43, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily takes place. And we know these two partners in crime here, Adolf and his friend Benito. Well, after the invasion of Sicily, the Italians are so worried that the war is going to come to Italy that Mussolini gets kicked out. He's no longer the dictator of Italy, and Italy declares that they're going to be neutral from now on. Okay, we don't want any more this fighting going on.
Yeah, right.
Meanwhile, back at Camp Hale, summertime activities included a lot of rock climbing and mountain climbing. In August of 43, the Japanese, who had captured 2 islands in the Aleutian chain, Attu and Kiska, needed to be evicted. There was a tremendous battle for Attu earlier that year, and Kiska was thought to be equally well fortified, and so a large task force was put together, 34,000 Allied troops, Americans and Canadians. The 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment is one of those that take part in this. This is not the cargo ships off of Long Beach Harbor. This is the invasion force fleet that's in Kiska Harbor. The troops are landing there. They run up into the hills. At the shore, they find Japanese submarines. Well, it turns out a few days before the Americans and Canadians got there, the Japanese evacuated. We didn't know that. So we hit the beaches, we go up the barren hills. There's no trees on Kiska. It's a windswept, terrible place to be. And the clouds are covering, and there's, one unit's up here and they hear noise on the other side of the ridge, and they start firing, and the people on the other side of the ridge start firing back. Well, they're firing at their own men because the Japanese are not there. and there were a lot of casualties. The 87th loses 17 men killed and 50 wounded, and they weren't even fighting the enemy. The total of all the Allied forces there were 313 were killed or wounded. So this is a very terrible mistake. Meanwhile, back at Camp Hale, winter's setting in, and so the troops are learning some new skills. September of '43, Operation Avalanche, the invasion of southern Italy. Went fairly well. Meanwhile, back at Camp Hale, the troops are working on their marching skills and learning how to do the snowplow. I think that's my dad in the back row there. I don't think he advanced beyond the snowplow stage. In the fall of winter of '43 and '44, combat is continuing in Italy. The Allies are slowly crawling up the boot. The Gustav Line in Monte Cassino puts a halt to that drive in the fall of '43. In January of '44, Operation Shingle, the invasion at Anzio to get around the Gustav Line, is launched. That doesn't go very well, and so there are now two stalemates in Italy. In January of '44, about the same time as the Anzio operation, the 87th returns from their duty at Kiska. No more Japanese tried to attack Kiska. And here they are marching into camp with their whites on. And at this time, the division is called the 10th Light Division Alpine Pack, and it consists of the 3 infantry regiments, along with their supporting units, the artillery, the quartermaster, medical, all that sort of thing that you need to have to keep a division on the move. And for the new recruits, ski lessons, courtesy of the Army, came, by the numbers. Anybody who thought being in the 10th was going to be a weekend in Sun Valley was quickly set straight. They were skiing from morning to night, climbing. I think the guys in the 10th were probably the best, most well-trained and best conditioned soldiers that the U.S. Army ever put in the field. They were also known as the Jackass Division because, as I mentioned, they had about 4,000 mules and horses, and you can see they could load them down with several hundred pounds of gear. At one point they thought, well, it might be a good idea to put snowshoes on these mules so they don't sink up to their backs in snow. There's a picture in the upper left there of a horse with these round snowshoes on a sofa. I have it on good authority that the mules did not like the snowshoes. They were also known as the Guinea Pig Division because the Army was always sending equipment to Camp Hale for them to test out. See if these new types of skis work. See if these boots keep your feet warm. See if this parka is going to be adequate for your needs. And so they would always be getting things sent to them by the Army. There was a period of time where they were trying to find a vehicle that would work well in snow. So they had this, looks like kind of a miniature Jeep. Here's kind of an early snowmobile pulling a couple of skiers. Here's a snowmobile that's got a shroud over the motor in front. Bigger one kind of looks more like a snowcat. This thing has a propeller on the back. The vehicle they ultimately decided on was the M29 Weasel made by Studebaker. It was good. It could hold about 3 troops. Could pull skiers. You could load up supplies in there, and you could go across fairly deep, soft snow with it. So this was the vehicle that they adopted as their primary vehicle there. When the machines didn't work, it was a good old-fashioned dog sled. And when the animals pooped out on you, well, then men became the pack animals. They have a song called 90 Pounds of Rucksack. And you can see here the troops are fairly heavily laden. They're not only, have the rucksacks on their backs, but they're also pulling the sled. That must have been a fun exercise. There was a certain mystique about mountain troops. They were on the cover, and there was a photo story about them inside. This is Walter Prager from Dartmouth. He was a staff sergeant at that time. He's got ice crampons on his boots there to steady him going down an ice field. Oops, what happened? No, stop. Ah! I've made a terrible mistake here. I hit the wrong button. Okay, we're going to go way back. Everybody close your eyes till I get back to the beginning. Help. Where's my tech support here? I hit this button and I went all the way to the end. Okay, this will give you a chance to catch up on your sleep while I'm working this out. Keep going. Okay, can we go to the page that shows the whole zero in?
Thank you.
All right, Candace is our lifesaver here. Thank you very much. As I said, they were on in Life magazine. Saturday Evening Post devoted a cover to them. Warner Brothers came to Camp Hale to film a 21-minute training, well, not a training film, but a recruiting film, and so they were there and put together. You can actually find that on YouTube if you look for Mountain Fighters. You'll see that, and you can play it out. Supposedly, this movie, I Love a Soldier, had some 10th Mountain activity in it, although I've never seen the movie, so I can't vouch for that. They got to the point where they were known as Eisenhower's Playboys, because they were, this glamour group. All the other troops are, slugging through the hills of Italy and getting ready to invade Europe. And these boys are here in Colorado skiing and mountain climbing and having a great time. But it wasn't all fun and games. They were on the rifle range here in summer and winter. Things got a little boring with doing nothing but training. Here we are, the people doing the potato peeling. And of course, what do young, healthy men far from home have on their minds? And of course, they're thinking about Betty Grable and maybe the girl back home. The closest big town would be Leadville, but Leadville was often put off limits because of a thriving red light district. And a report on Leadville said that the morals of Leadville are said to be on a rather low plane. So on occasion, the troops went into Denver. If you're familiar with the Brown Palace Hotel, you know they have this 8-story atrium. And one weekend, some of the troops went in there. Steve Knowlton told me the story, that they went in the hotel and just happened to have some climbing rope with them. So they went up to the top floor and rappelled down into the lobby, which didn't please the hotel manager all that much. And then came along the D series. Every unit, every division, before it went into combat, had to pass, you might say, a final exam. It was called the D series. And from March 26th until the middle of April, the 10th was put through their paces. And they marched off into the hills, taking the mules with them. They had to build snow caves. They had to prove their ability to fight and maneuver in deep snow. It looks like a happy bunch here. But some people came down with snow blindness. They lost or broke their snow goggles, and that was a very painful condition. And a lot of men got frostbite, but still they did a good job, they felt. They marched back down out of the hills, expecting at any moment they would get orders to go overseas and take part in the fighting. They were ready for war, but was the war ready for them? That was the big question. June the 4th of 1944, Rome is liberated. 2 days later, Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion, takes place. But meanwhile, back at Camp Hale, our boys are still playing war games in a remote Colorado valley, wondering if they're ever going to see combat. I mean, this was the thing that they joined the division to do. Besides skiing and climbing mountains, it was to fight. And now it was a matter of, let's prove how good we really are. And the Army wasn't giving them the chance. Leslie McNair, the general on the left there, he was charged of Army Ground Forces, and he was the one who would make the final decision about who would go, and he just wasn't happy with the 10th Mountain. He said that the artillery, the 75 millimeter pack howitzers were too small, they had too many mules, and so there was really no assignment for the 10th. But in the summer of 1944, finally the guys at Camp Hale get the news, get on a train, you're heading east. Well, they headed east as far as Camp Swift, Texas, outside of Austin. And this was really, I would say, the low point for the division. It was hot, dusty, humid, and without a mountain in sight. Many of the troops got into trouble, went AWOL, requested transfers to other units. The Army was trying to decide, well, should we break up the 10th and just send the soldiers, the 14,000 men, out to other divisions that have suffered heavy casualties, or should we just turn them into a regular flatland division and forget about this mountain thing? But General Marshall said, no, they trained as mountain troops and we're going to find some mountains for them to fight in. And so they got a new commanding general, George P. Hayes, who had earned the Medal of Honor in World War I. And he was a real leader of men. And he didn't know anything about mountains. He didn't know anything about skiing. He might have known a little bit about mules and horses, but he whipped them into shape. And as a result, they went from the cross bayonet insignia on their shoulder to the cross bayonet insignia with a mountain tab that showed to the world that they were elite troops. And this really brought the men a new sense of purpose and an excitement about what was in their future. In December of '44, the division was taken to Virginia, put on troop ships, and sent across. Now, the man who really made it happen was Mark Clark, who was at that time the 15th Army Group Commander. His troops, his old 5th Army and the 8th Army of the British, were stuck in the northern Apennine Mountains and they couldn't break into the Po River Valley. When he found out there was this mountain trained division sitting back in the States, he said, I want those guys. And so that's why they were sent over. Well, as soon as the 10th left, Camp Hale was dismantled. This $31 million camp was almost completely torn down because the Army said, we're probably not going to have any more mountain divisions, so there's no reason to keep the camp. The troops arrived in Naples in January '45. They trucked northward, north of Pisa and Florence, and that's where they run into the German line just south of the Po Valley. Their first combat action comes at a place called Riva Ridge. Anybody here ever ski Riva Ridge at Vail? Okay, so this is where the name comes from. I took this picture in '95 when I went over there with a dozen of the 10th Mountain Troops who were going to do a 50th anniversary reclimb of Riva Ridge. And it's one of the warmest memories I have, climbing Riva Ridge with them. Of course, there were no Germans shooting at us on this reclimb, so that was good. Here's what it looked like in '45. Fairly steep, rocky. Germans on top didn't think that the Allies could climb this. There had been several attempts to get through this area, and they had all failed. You see the lay of the land here. Riva Ridge is to the west, and a series of other mountains, Mount Belvedere, Gorgolesco, and a few others are off to the right. The Germans had their artillery observers and guns on Riva Ridge, and anytime there was a movement in the valley below, they could call down artillery fire on them. So it was decided to give Eisenhower's Playboys a crack at it, since nobody else seemed to have been able to do anything. And nobody really expected the 10th to do much because they'd never been in combat before. What do they know? So they sent out some patrols. They found out that there were some natural pathways up the face of Riva Ridge. Here you see General Hayes there on the right. And they're scouting out the locations. And on this schematic, you can see these little dotted arrow lines going up Riva Ridge. And so on the night of February 18th to 19th of 1945, a reinforced battalion, over 1,000 men, climbed this unclimbable sheer face of Riva Ridge without any preliminary artillery bombardment or anything to give away the fact that a hack was on the way. By dawn, they had reached the top. They had overcome the German opposition there. And the next day and night, Mount Belvedere and the subsequent peaks were taken out. Here's a view from Belvedere looking back at Riva Ridge. There were a lot of casualties that were incurred on Belvedere and the other mountains, but the 10th had proved their worth. There was a limited offensive in March of 45 when they made some further pushes further north through the mountains. Again, these were very costly in terms of the 10th boys being killed. You remember that I was telling you about Torger Tokla, the world ski jump record holder. Torger's killed during this March limited offensive, and I think it inspired the men in the division to avenge Torger's death because they wanted to pay the Germans back for what they had done to their hero. Then Operation Craftsman comes along in April of 1945. This was a drive by the entire 15th Army Group, the U.S. 5th Army and the British 8th Army, to break into the Po River Valley. So pleased was the higher headquarters about what the 10th had done in their previous engagements that they said, 10th, you're going to lead the way. And one of the great values and benefits of being successful in combat is you get more combat. And so 5th Army said, you guys lead the way. And so here they are coming through the last line of mountains down into the Po Valley. The 10th staged the Army's last horse-mounted cavalry charge in battle. Didn't go well. There were a lot of horses and men who were killed and wounded. And the 10th had a man who was the only one to earn the Medal of Honor in the division. His name was John McGrath. And it was a posthumous Medal of Honor. It was awarded after his death. There's another name you might be familiar with, Bob Dole. He was a very green second lieutenant. He was assigned to the division as a replacement. He had not gone through training at Camp Hale, didn't know anything about mountains. But he was in charge of a platoon, and they were charging a machine gun nest. And Dole was wounded, spent years in Army hospitals, almost lost the use of his right arm. And you might recall when back in the 80s and 90s, whenever he was on a TV newscast, he would always carry a pen in his right hand, and he would always shake hands with his left hand. And that's because his right arm was almost completely useless at that point. They get to the Po River. The Germans have blown the bridges. How do we get across? Well, somebody found a bunch of boats, and the men paddle across under fire to get to the north side. So the 10th is the first American unit to get to the north side of the Po River. They start chasing the Germans upwards towards the Alps. And at this point, Robinson Duff, who was an assistant division commander, he's leading this task force as kind of the spearhead of the assault. And he's wounded when his Jeep hits a mine. There's another name you might know, William Darby, Bill Darby. He was the guy who founded the Rangers in the early 40s. And he had his Ranger unit almost completely decimated during the fighting at Anzio. He was then put in charge of a regiment, the 45th Division, and then the Army said, we've got an assignment for you. We want you to be the assistant division commander of the 10th Mountain Division because Colonel Duff had been killed. So Darby is now in charge of this advance north of the Po Valley. They get to Lake Garda, biggest lake in Italy. There's a large villa across the lake on the west side called Villa Feltrinelli, which is where Mussolini had his summer resort. Well, the troops knew this, and they said, well, let's go across there and see if we can pick up any souvenirs. Mussolini t-shirt or hat or something like that. They get in what are called ducks. These are amphibious trucks. And unfortunately, one of them was badly overloaded and 24 men died when it sank in the middle of the lake. A few years ago, a search party discovered this duck at the bottom of the lake, about 800 or 900 feet of water. And it's still there. There's no trace of any of the soldiers, but the machine is there. Thank you. And Darby himself is killed 2 days before the war ends. He's killed at a little town called Torbole at the northern end of Lake Garda. May 2nd of 45, the German armies in Italy surrender. In the rubble-strewn streets of their towns and villages, the citizens come out laughing, singing, dancing, kissing their liberators, and it's a wonderful scene. General Hayes finds out that the Germans have left behind a big warehouse full of alcoholic beverages. And he says, I want 2 bottles to be distributed to every man in the division. And so here's a shot of some of the alcohol being found. And here's my dad on the left, enjoying one of the bottles of champagne. It was a very happy day when the guns went silent. And in order to celebrate the end of the war, the 10th Mountain Boys decided to do something that would be uniquely theirs. They organized a ski race on these crusty summer snows of Mount Vanguard, where Italy, Yugoslavia, and Austria come together. Has anyone here seen the new film by Chris Anthony? It's called Mission Mount Vanguard. Okay, we got a few here who have seen that. And Chris Anthony goes back and he kind of recreates what had happened on that happy day. Walter Prager, the Dartmouth ski team coach, wins this race. The 10th, with war in Europe over, is tabbed for the invasion of Japan. And fortunately for them, it doesn't happen because the 2 atomic bombs forced Japan to surrender. And the 10th returns home in October of 45, and they're, you might say, disbanded in November. They leave behind 1,000 men killed and 4,000 wounded in Italy. But the wartime exploits and the can-do mountain spirit propel the 10th Mountain Veterans to heights that they probably didn't even imagine themselves. Bob Dole ran for president on the GOP ticket in '96. David Brower became president of the Sierra Club. Ben Duke was president of the Gates Rubber Company in Denver. Merrill Hastings became the publisher of Ski Magazine and a couple of other publications in New York. Bill Bowerman, he's the University of Oregon's track coach, the U.S. Olympic track coach in 1972, and one of the co-founders of the Nike Shoe Corporation. Not a bad resume for Bill. Paul Petzold becomes the founder of the National Outdoor Leadership School. How many are familiar with Knowles? Okay, quite a few. Well, he's the guy who was behind it. A number of the ski areas were founded or staffed by 10th Mountain veterans. Vail was started by these 3 gentlemen. Aspen had Friedel Pfeiffer, John Litchfield, Percy Rideout, Fritz Benedict, and maybe a few more who were involved in the setting of that resort to be world class. Larry Jump was one of the founders of A Basin. And right here in Steamboat, I'm sure you'll recognize some of these names. Gordy Wren, Rudy, and Karl Schnackenberg. How many of you knew any of these gentlemen? All right, a goodly number. So you owe, even though, you've been here since 1915, these men really put it on the map, I think, after the war. And there were over 50 ski areas across the country that had at least one 10th Mountain veteran involved in some aspect of its operation. And skiing took off on an upward climb that I don't think has showed any sign of slowing, even though the prices are a little. When I first skied Vale in 1972, it was $5 a day. I should have gotten that lifetime ski pass when I had the chance. So what happens to the 10th then after the war? For 40 years they don't exist really. They're reactivated in 1985 at Fort Drum, New York, and they became the Army's most deployed division. They've served in Haiti, Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And they still use mules. Isn't that wonderful? Camp Hale today, I think worthwhile to look at what's there or not there now. The valley that was once filled with over 800 buildings is now pretty much barren. You can still find a few foundations of some of the buildings. This is the remains of the field house where they had ceremonies and dances and athletic contests. And at the top of Tennessee Pass, about 7 miles to the south of Camp Hale, is the 10th Mountain Division War Memorial. How many people have ever stopped for even a minute to look at the memorial? Great. This is the memorial. It's got the name of all 1,000 men who died in World War II engraved on it. I like to point out this slide because on my left side, your right side, you see the name of Torger Tokla, the ski jump champion. Right below him is Arthur Tokala. They're not only on there because of alphabetical reasons, but in March of '45, Art Tokala was standing next to Torger Tokla when a bullet or a shell fragment came in. Tokala is carrying a satchel full of mortar rounds. It blows the mortar rounds up, kills both Torger and Arthur. And I think it's fitting that they're on the monument together for all eternity. Memorial Day at Tennessee Pass, as Nancy mentioned, we always have a nice turnout of friends and veterans and family members and just interested passersby. And at that time we pay honor to the deceased of the division. We have men coming from all over the country to take part in this. This is a picture I took of some veterans in 2014. I think all but one of them are now gone. They're fading away very rapidly, unfortunately. I like to think of the 10th Mountain as being in their prime, late teens, early 20s. Men who looked at a mountain and said, I can conquer that. Who cares if there are Germans up on top with guns? We can do it. And they did it. And I want to close with the motto of the 10th Mountain in the Second World War: Sempre Avanti, always forward. Thank you very much. Before I open it up to questions, I'll put a slide here on my book. I want to introduce a young man who was part of the original 10th, who lives here in Steamboat. I'm sure a lot of you know him. Name is Crosby Perry Smith. Crosby, would you accept the applause of the audience? Crosby was in the Pioneer and Ammunition Platoon of the Headquarters Company of the 86th Mountain Infantry Regiment, and he went through from the beginning to the end, and he's still here with us. He's made the sport of skiing his profession for most of his life, and a longtime resident of the Yampa Valley and Steamboat, and love it that you're here. Thank you, Crosby. So, do we have time for a few questions? Anybody want? I know I've covered everything, so you can't possibly have any. Yes, in the orange hat.
So, my name's Bill McKelvey, and I was a history teacher here at the high school. And we did a local history magazine called Three Wire Winter. So, I'm in Gordy Wren's house, and it's close to Christmas time because he's got his tree up. And we're interviewing Gordy Wren, and he goes, well, I've got a surprise for you. And he goes into a closet, and he brings out one of those long pair of white skis, and he says, these were Mussolini's skis. So when you showed that little photo, Mussolini's little, he showed me the same photo that he had in the scrapbook of the villa or whatever you want to resort. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I've always wondered, was he telling it really was Mussolini's skis, or was he pulling my leg
Well,
as a history teacher?
It could have been both, but I have a next door neighbor in Denver named Tom Hames, and his father, Captain Eugene Hames, was on the patrol that went across Lake Garda to Villa Feltrinelli. And they raided the place. They came back with all sorts of souvenirs. And Tom had I don't know how many of them, a bunch of medallions that various organizations in Italy had given to Mussolini, and Tom has loaned them to the ski museum in Vale, and some of them are on display there. So it's very possible that those skis could have been his. Yeah. Are they still around anywhere?
Well, that, we'd have to ask the family. Gordy Wren passed away.
Right. They were donated to the museum in Steamboat? All right, very good.
Gordy Wren's son works at Cook Chevrolet. You can ask him.
Okay, I'll stop by there on my way home tomorrow. Any other questions or comments? Do we have any other 10th Mountain veterans in the group that I've overlooked? Okay. Other questions? Anybody? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about what winter was like in Camp Hale? I mean, it was very high altitude. It seems like a very forlorn, cold place to be.
Yeah, what was winter like at Camp Hale? Well, there are so many stories told about Camp Hell, as the troops called it, because it would get down to, below zero many times during the D series. I think it dropped down to 35 below zero, and these guys are living in snow caves out in the elements. One of the major problems, was the fact that all of the 800 plus buildings there had coal stoves in them. And they had the DNRGW rail line that ran on the west side of the camp. So every day there were, triple header locomotives running through the camp. There were all of these coal stoves spewing coal smoke into the air. And many of the soldiers came down with a respiratory disease called the Pando hack. And this is quite debilitating for many of them, and a lot of guys had to transfer to some other unit because they couldn't take either the cold or the altitude or the pollutants that were in the air. You talk about Denver having smog, you should have been at Camp Hale in 1943. But the conditions, except for 2 or 3 months in the summertime, were pretty extreme, and a lot of the soldiers, I know my dad said he was offered in 1962 to buy a couple lots in downtown Vale for about $10,000. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that cold again. And so he and my mom bought worthless desert property in southern New Mexico. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. But it was rough. It wasn't just the training, but it was also the environment that they had to train in. Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned that there were some Norwegian troops training at Camp Hale.
And I was wondering if any of those were involved in that that operation in Norway on which the Heroes of Telemark movie was based.
He's bringing up the movie, the Heroes of Telemark, where there were a group of first British and secondly Norwegian commandos that were dropped into Norway to knock out the heavy water plant that the Germans were using in hopes of developing their own atomic weapons. And the answer to that is no.
Thank you.
They did land in Normandy a few days, weeks after the main invasion, June 6, 44, fought their way across northern France, Belgium, Holland. I think they were in Denmark too. And they finally made it to Norway at the end of the war, and they were the honor guard for when the King of Norway returned from exile in England. So they have a combat record to be proud of and should be better known, but unfortunately it isn't. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I was interested about the Tench Mountain Vision hut system.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of different cabins throughout Colorado. You can rent a bed or the whole building. And I was wondering if they're living in Camp Hale and in snow huts and snow caves, stuff like that, what role did those huts play a part of it?
Well, I'll give you a little background, and I know Nancy's got some literature there on the hut system. A gentleman by the name of Fritz Benedict, who was one of the founders of the Aspen Resort, he was an architect, and after the war, one of his goals was to create a hut system where there would be a series of huts spaced about a 1 day's hike or 1 day's snowshoe or cross-country ski adventure to the next one. And these were patterned after hut systems that are throughout the mountains of Europe. And over the years, I can't remember, there are like 15 or 20 that the 10th established.
There's about 10 that are actually 10th Mountain Division named. Then the association also runs several other hut systems, but they're all connected in one way or another, but they're not relevant to the World War II training. And the first hut was Robert McNamara. I think some of you might know him. He was the Secretary of Defense. And so McNamara's hut, then Maggie named after his wife, and it goes on and on. The division hut, named after the division, is at the base of Homestead Peak, where they did some of their winter training. And we've got some information. The Hut Association is one of our partners at the foundation. And if you buy your 10th Mountain car license plates, some of those funds go to the Hut Association.
How many people have a 10th Mountain license plate?
Okay, guys, the
4 of us?
challenge is on.
4 of us? Come on, do better than that. Was there a question here? Did you have a question earlier? No? Well, in the back.
The gentleman from Walden, Colorado, Ole Coleman, is that name well?
Ole Coleman.
His book has been published here. It was Uphill with the Downhill Troops.
Uphill with the downhill troops. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something like 90 books that have been written by or about the 10th Mountain. In fact, I'm working on one now. It's a picture history of Camp Hale that'll supposed to be out late this year, hopefully. Well, you guys have just been a fantastic audience. I can't thank you enough for coming today, and always keep the 10th Mountain in your heart. Thank you very much.